You can sit right here if you want.
Okay, good morning. So I want to just make sure AML is up and running. And does it look good, fellas? You're guaranteeing me 100% that they're watching in class and can see it, correct?
100%.
100%.
100%.
That's what I like, Sean. 100%. Okay, so if I could have your attention, please. I want to give a brief introduction. We are happy to have today's presenter, Mr. Stephen Hill. And again, I would hope that you would give him all your attention. I think that it's valuable material for all of us. And I think when you leave here in an hour or so that you will be happy that we had him here. So there is currently a prescription drug and opioid epidemic, as well as a teen vaping epidemic going on all across America, as we well know. Drug overdose is now the leading cause of accidental death in the United States. The CDC estimated there were over 110,000 drug overdose deaths in the United States in 2023, one of the highest numbers ever recorded. Today we have a special guest who is going to present on these topics. Stephen Hill, founder of Speak Sobriety, is going to share his story about his personal struggles with mental health, substance misuse, and the journey to recovery. Stephen was a student athlete that lost his way when he started using nicotine, smoking marijuana, and drinking alcohol his freshman year of high school. He progressed to harder drugs as time went on, becoming addicted to opioid painkillers and heroin. Stephen was eventually able to overcome his addiction, but not before going through years of treatment and difficult times. As you listen to Stephen's story, focus not only on the negative choices he made as a teenager that nearly destroyed his life, but more importantly, also focus on how he was able to turn his life around when he started making healthy and positive choices, and how he found strength in overcoming his struggles. Please hold all of your questions until the presentation is concluded. If you do not get a chance to ask a question during the Q&A or would like to speak with Stephen personally, you can do so after the presentation. We are going to watch a short introduction video at this time, and then Stephen will begin his presentation. Thank you.
The hardest part about addiction for me was being in a position where my life was a complete disaster, and I wholeheartedly wanted to stop using, but I had absolutely no control to stop the show. I actually got to a point towards the end where I accepted my fate as prison and eventually dead.
For the
first time ever, more than 100,000 deadly overdoses were recorded in the U.S.
A 13-year-old boy has now died after he was exposed to fentanyl.
Local law enforcement is bracing for the problems that could come with legalized marijuana. Federal law still classifies marijuana as an illegal controlled substance on par with heroin.
Experts are now calling vaping an epidemic.
Teens are being hospitalized with lifelong injuries, all because they're inhaling too much, too often.
Many students are using prescription drugs to try to gain an advantage studying.
Underage drinking is a problem nationwide.
Michael, who's 16 months older than Stephen, they were like very different, you know, but still always hung out together and great friends. And then Stephen came along, and from a young age we knew that, you know, that's all he wanted to do was play sports. You know, like in one season he could be playing, you know, baseball, lacrosse, hockey.
So I'd say it was good going into the time period when Stephen started becoming different and behaving irrationally during his junior year of high school, and when he started smoking pot and then using opioids, his grades at school went down and his whole attitude changed, and he was defiant and didn't think we had any right to tell him what to do.
I remember him just screaming at my parents. They were just getting these huge fights, and he was, you know, partially in denial that he was having a problem.
So Stephen got kicked off of his sophomore hockey team, which made him refuse to go to school.
So what's he going to do after school? Where's his whole life? That's all he did was after school play sports. Now again, here he is. So he starts finding kids to hang out with who, what are they doing at 2:15? They're just going to get high somewhere. And, you know, because he wasn't the kid who was coming home and reading.
And I remember he even punched a hole in his bedroom wall at one point, out of the anger of my parents trying to help him, and him saying that, and it just felt like it was spiraling out of control at that point.
I came home from school, and apparently there had been some kind of fight between Stephen and my parents, and he had slammed the door on his way out, and so our side door glass was shattered. And he just kind of laughed and thought the whole thing was hilarious, and showed us a bunch of money that he had, and then just walked out of the house. And so you could just tell that he was in a completely different mindset, that it wasn't the same person that we grew up with.
And then later on, it then became less of anger and more just like he was out of it and like couldn't communicate with him. And it was kind of, that was scary in its own way. Like I felt like he wasn't there.
I think if you would have known Steve during that time, you would have thought he was a terrible person. And like now I've gotten used to when someone's judging someone, like, you know, he stays home all the time and just drinks alone, like he's a loser, that type of stuff. Like it gives you perspective to never think like that anymore. Doesn't seem that it should have happened to Steve. Like had a great life growing up, great support from his parents, like we were always there for him, but it's just like it can happen to anyone.
Everywhere he went, I went with him. He went to a treatment facility in California. I went out there with him.
There's four of us, so it's hard enough for them to, you know, equalize their time amongst us. And when one of them is demanding their attention because he's at a point where he could die, you know, obviously that takes precedent. There's really no argument.
All his trips to the Karen Foundation, to Mountainside, you know, every court date.
Kids or adults who don't have the support, they just, you know, either they're overdosing or they're living in the streets, and, you know, and then their life never gets on track.
And then you see the amount of friends he's had like overdose or die related to drugs and stuff like that. It's just like it's a miracle. Like you should just be thankful that if you can go through like whatever it was, like an 8-year period of being on and off drugs, that you come out on the other side is just like, you know, you're in the 1%.
Looking back on it, he needed our support. That was the only way that he was going to be able to get through this.
You know, Stephen's life got on track because we helped him so much get on track. I mean, he did it in the end. You know, he did what he needed to do, but I was never one to say, you know, yeah, just kick him out and he needs to hit rock bottom. And, you know, I was more about the more support and the more help
simply cannot happen. You cannot become addicted to drugs or alcohol if you've never tried them before, which means the reasons why people use substances in the first place, that first choice, that first use, has little to nothing to do with addiction at all. It has everything to do with your surroundings, your mental health, your self-confidence, your self-esteem. And because of this thing we call stigma, these negative stereotypes, nobody wants to believe it's going to happen to them. I never thought I would be the guy that people were calling the junkie, the dope fiend, the drug addict, the drunk, the dropout, the felon, and for me, worst of all, was the all-encompassing failure. Words you describe me, hurtful words you describe me and others like me that contributed to my downfall and my inability to recover. But as a downfall into the darkness of addiction even start in the first place? Well, for me, so much of my life can be summed up into a first choice and a second chance. A choice I made my freshman year of high school to pick up that first drink, to pick up that first drug, which would change my life forever and lead me down that dark path of addiction, right on the meaning of true pain and struggle. But that same struggle to make me the man who I am today, finding a way out of that struggle, it's what gave me a real second chance at life. I found a way to take my mess and I turned it into a message. And this is the story of my journey to recovery. Before I go any further, I first want to thank the school and the health department for inviting me here to speak today. I am truly grateful to be here. Anytime I get a chance to share my story of recovery, it's an amazing experience for me. If I can help one person avoid some mistakes that I made, help one person understand mental health and addiction a little bit better, put you in a position to help someone who's struggling, or even better, prevent them from going down that path. If I can do any of that here today, then it was worth me to come here and speak. I've been sober for over 12 years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Everything good that I have in my life today is a direct result of sobriety. I'm at a point in my life today I didn't think was possible 12 years ago. If you were to tell me 12 years ago I would ever be back in any type of school or community setting at all, I would have just said, no, it's not going to happen. My thought process would be something like, drug charges more serious in the school zone, so I can't go there. If you were to tell me 12 years ago I'd be getting invited to speak at middle schools, high schools, colleges, universities, different events all across the country, to share my story about my personal struggles with substance use, now as a sober man, I would have told you you're insane, you're out of your mind, that is never going to happen. The truth is that I was the one that was insane. I was the one that was completely out of my mind. Once I became addicted to drugs, especially opiates, which are any type of prescription narcotic painkiller, or the drugs that are killing people every single day, heroin, and now fentanyl. Once I became dependent on these types of substances, I could not see a life without it. My way of thinking was so wrong. These drugs turned me into someone I am not, made me do things that I wouldn't normally do, and I had to suffer the consequences because of it. Some of those consequences I still live with today. This morning I'm going to share my story with you. You're going to hear about what I had to go through as an individual, more of what my family had to go through, what some of my friends had to go through. I have some friends who have made it through with me. Some are still out there using or misusing drugs and alcohol. I have some friends who are currently in prison, and some have, unfortunately, lost their life to addiction or substance use. And when I say addiction, I mean a fatal progressive illness. Fatal meaning, yes, you can lose your life from it. It can happen in a number of ways. Today it's most commonly associated with a drug overdose, or specifically an opioid overdose. As of about 6 months ago, I now know 54 people personally who have lost their life to a drug overdose, and most of them were in their 20s and they passed away. Yes, I'm in recovery and I work in this field. You can say I'm around people who are more high risk, but 54, that is still a very alarming number. Now the truth is, most of you will never get there. I hope that none of you ever do. But you're going to hear in my story how I was able to get there. This can also be fatal through a drunk driving accident, which in my opinion can be even worse. Because not only can you take your own life, you can take somebody else's as well. And a lot of people who struggle with this, who struggle with a substance use disorder, also struggle with some type of mental health disorder. Whether it be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be ADHD, and substance use. It's called a co-occurring disorder. And I have some friends who have that struggle who unfortunately ended up taking their own life. Now it's fatal, but it's also progressive, meaning it gets progressively worse, usually starting with nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol. And especially with marijuana and alcohol, I hear this gateway drug or starter drug argument from so many different people. I hear it from students like yourselves, I hear it from teachers, parents, counselors. So when I first got sober, I was working at a drug and alcohol treatment program, and me and some of my coworkers were having this gateway drug debate. Actually, I was. He said, okay, the first time you ever tried a hard drug, were you under the influence of alcohol? Whether something is legal or illegal on a piece of paper somewhere has no effect on your brain and on your bodies. Your brain's not fully developed until you're 25 years old. The earlier you start using substances, the more likely it turns into an addiction. Now, I am also the guy who's going to stand up here and tell you that if anybody ever vapes or drinks or smokes, that you'll definitely die or end up in prison one day. I had about 700 students.